So we now had some basic work with Express.js. Now let's also dig into the internals of Express.js, at least a little bit. Here is the Express.js code repository on GitHub. It's open source, so you can dive into the code. And no worries, we'll not do a deep dive analysis. But it's interesting to see how some things work. So in there, on that GitHub repo, click on lib, and then you will find a response.js file. Now click on it. In that file, you will find a lot of code. Now let's simply search for send and then an opening bracket. And you will see how the send function, so basically the function we are calling here, how this is defined internally. And this helps us understand it. And this, by the way, is always a great technique if you want to see what something does behind the scenes. And if you need to do something yourself, for example, set some header, or if that is done for you. And we had that default header of text HTML, right? So let's see what send does internally. It does a bunch of checks to see if we're using outdated versions of that function, which we didn't in this course, so let's ignore that. And then down there, it basically analyzes what kind of data you're sending. And you see that if it's a string data, so some text as we are doing it here, that in this case, it sets the content type to HTML, but only if we haven't set it yet. So it checks if the content type header is not present yet, in which case it sets it, otherwise it would leave our default. If we have other values, like a number, a boolean, or so on, it would actually set it to binary or JSON data. So this is just some of the internal things it does. And you don't need to go through the entire code here. It's a bit much, and you're using Express so that you don't have to do everything on your own. But diving into this can help sometimes. Now, one other interesting thing to see is that we can actually also shorten this code here, where we set up the server. We can pass app to that create server method, but instead, we can also just use app and call listen. And this will do both these things for us. Something we can see in the official code if we go into the application.js file. In there, what we can see is that if we search for listen, here, the listen function in the end just does the two things we did before. It calls HTTP create server and passes itself, so the app object, which we previously also passed to that, passes it to create server. And then this in the end just makes sure that listen gets called on that server object. So it internally does the same we did here. And this of course saves some code, and now we can also remove that HTTP import up there. So now our code looks like this and will still work fine. It restarts here, and if I reload this page, this is looking good to me. So now we're using Express.js, and you hopefully got a basic understanding of what it's doing and why this helps you write cleaner code. Because now you have a clearly defined structure, use this middleware funnel, and you save code. The question, of course, is how can we now handle different routes as we previously did, where we had /message and /nothing and so on. And of course, it would be nice if we now could also read incoming requests in an easier way. Well, we'll do both and see both over the next lectures.